right. We'll turn it over to you, Sam. So go ahead with our movement mortgage minute.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So rates fairly volatile day to day. The markets are a little skittish. We're about the same as last week, maybe slightly higher. Conventional and jumbo rates are low sixes, mid sixes, and FHA VA rates are upper fives, close to six, depending on credit score. So we had Barry Habib. Barry Habib's he's not an economist, but he's a mortgage housing expert, and he owns MBS Highway. Gave a presentation to Movement today, and he's sticking by his forecasts of earlier this year, which he still is calling for rates to be in the low to mid fives by June, which is only a month away. He says the everything's in line for a decent rate drop. He, along with a lot of people, think the Fed is overcorrecting and is probably going to put us into a small recession. The good news is, well, not good news, but housing historically does just fine in recessions, with the exception of 2008, but that was kind of unique because of the mortgages. But the mortgage standards are solid now, so if we go into a recession, it probably won't hurt the housing market, and it will lower rates. And he also is calling for home values to be higher by the end of the year over year, which we're already starting to go up again, it looks like. So fairly optimistic, specifically for real estate, the forecast, I guess.
Awesome. So pretty good start of the week. It was a very busy weekend, even though the sun was shining for Saturday and Sunday was kind of iffy. We had a really good attendance at open houses, and overall the marketplace is a little wonky in certain places, but all in all, our numbers, at least as a company, are pacing upwards. So I think we're seeing the same thing that Sam's seen, is a lot of optimism out there and a lot of life changes that are happening that are keeping the real estate market, at least in the Washington, Idaho area, going very, very well. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to our training tonight. I'm Rochelle Wilhite, the designated broker of Best Choice Realty. I've covered this topic before. In fact, it seems to be around April or May of every year. We talk about listings. Oh my gosh, why is my listing not selling? And so Candice and Shannon and I all got together, and we put together a slide deck tonight to kind of go over some of the best kept secrets. Some of you might need to be refreshed on some strategy, but I really want to start with this affirmation, because I think many of you just need an affirmation or a quote. And I pulled this actually from a sales trainer that I trained under back in 2008-9. So this is kind of an affirmation that's come from that. In life and in business, the largest costs are often the ones you don't see or do not directly feel. Challenge yourself to reach beyond conventional approaches. You will find once there is where most of your competition has yet to arrive. And I like that quote because it really talks about listings and pricing and just thinking outside the box. And that's kind of what today is all about, is giving you maybe some tips and tricks from producers, from top listing agents, of how they were able to get their projects sold. So I kind of built my own quote today, which is kind of stems from a lot of conversations I've had this morning with a few of our listing agents. A little bit of frustration, a little bit of angst out there, is like, gosh, I thought I'd have multiple offers by now. I had this expectation because of how much activity that we'd have multiple offers, and it's Monday and we're not feeling like we're going to get the multiple offers. Or I've got sellers who are like, if we can't get this thing done, I'm going to take it off the market. So I'm feeling kind of the same way that a lot of other listing agents are feeling it. And I needed to hear this loud and clear today. So this is something I just kind of, based on the affirmation and kind of reworking some of my thoughts from this morning, the highest cost of an unsold listing. Some of you have listings. I have listings. It's far more, it's the cost is more expensive. I know Shannon and I have spent money in staging and photography. A lot of those services that we've invested in, you got to kind of like realize that that's sometimes the cost of doing business. After all, we receive leads from these types of ventures, whether we take a risk on putting a listing on the market that does not sell. But actually the highest cost of a listing not selling is our reputation. And that's what I really want to kind of frame our conversation today. Our other colleagues, our other agents at Best Choice Realty, they know if a listing does not sell. And it's because we did not position the listing well. And so we need to think outside the box, much like the national trainer Scott has told me to do many, many years ago. If it was not priced in a place that made sound business sense for both you and for the seller, you have to reposition, you have to rework it, you have to kind of roll up your sleeves and get to work. The professionals of today, the ones that are actually selling their listings, they don't gamble on their reputation and they do not gamble with the seller's money. They are very blunt and they are excellent communicators. And then that's where I would start my affirmation this morning is I am a good communicator. I think outside the box. I'm going to get creative and come up with a solution for my seller. So that's how I'm framing today's session or today's training is that you've got to think differently and really challenge yourself to go beyond just a conventional, put it on the market and hope it sells. We have to really roll up our sleeves and get to work. So the next slide, Shannon, if you could, please. So when Candice and I are taking, we took a lot of phone calls over the weekend and even today, and a lot of the problems that we're finding, and this is why we want to tackle this topic today, was my listing's not selling. So we really want to define what the problem is. My listing is not selling. That's the topic of the half hour today. So if you could help us in really kind of coming up with, instead of just calling us and saying, I don't know why my listing's not selling, we want to teach you on what are some of the steps that we would do as top listing agents to identify maybe some areas where we could jump in and help. If you just come to us and my listing's not selling and have not thought through some of these things on the screen here, it takes us longer to get to a solution. So maybe identify on a piece of paper some of the selling obstacles, maybe some of the feedback that you've received from the showings. And also think about not only the challenges or obstacles, but what are some of the selling highlights? What are some of the really good things that have come from you taking the listing? What is the competition? What has appeared since you listed? If your home or your property or your condominium has been on the market for 60 days, you should know what listings have appeared on the marketplace since you listed your place. What is the competition? How do they show? We also might want to consider what kind of incentives, how are you promoting those incentives? Did you do a CMA? What's the pricing like? Is the property marketed right? Is it available? What are the seller's expectations and are they in alignment? I heard from one listing agent, she goes, my seller was expecting that I was going to be doing open houses throughout the day on Saturday and throughout the day on Sunday because she heard that we have so many real estate agents at Best Choice Realty. So somewhere the expectations have to be reset with sellers. And sometimes the sellers have unreasonable special requests once you've signed the agreement with them that they sometimes place on the listing or the relationship. So any type of seller expectations or special requests, we also would want to know that as we're defining the problem of a listing not selling. These are some things that we look at, and I've counseled many, many listing agents and sellers directly on those items. Then as Candice and I are going through it, we also will start to look at just some simple things. So sometimes before we even have a phone call with you, and Candice says, well, maybe this listing is not selling, and we know we have to call this agent back, we're going to look at some of the easies, the tidy items. So, if you look at the left side of the screen here, spelling errors, they do matter. Location, if you're in the wrong location number, or maybe you're not marketing yourself like Bothell, and then there's another area that's kind of right on the border of Snohomish and King County. We've found that by putting it in a different area code or doing a double listing, oftentimes we can get more eyeballs or more exposure. Same thing down in Pierce County and Thurston County. We have some cities that kind of encroach on both sides. My most famous one that I think I've shared before in other listings trainings would be the city of Fircrest. City of Fircrest is also in the city of Tacoma, but if I listed the property in Fircrest with that city address, it doesn't get as much exposure. Well, versus I would probably put it in Fircrest and double list it in Tacoma because it gets when people are searching, they don't know the area very well. They don't know about Fircrest. They know about Tacoma. And so we might want to place it in two different area codes. There is a way to do that. on Northwest MLS, but also just double check that you have your area numbers and your area and your kind of like your location established. That's kind of like what we consider a no-brainer, but it's sometimes often overlooked, or you're working in an area which you're unfamiliar with. Lot size, taxes, as simple as, okay, the taxes are due in April, but if you've had a listing all the way through October, November, December, gosh, you might want to go back in and change your taxes to be reflective of what the taxes are for 2023, not 2022. That is often overlooked by listing agents that kind of keep a stale listing on the market. Same thing with square footage. If your property they've converted space into square footage and they've maybe done a refinance in the last couple of years, and you're taking information from maybe a past listing, such as square footage, or from the tax records, and your client has actually converted that square footage into livable square footage, you can take account for that. And so there's a way of properly documenting that on the MLS, but you've got to make sure you're calculating square footage correctly. So come to Candice, come to me, come to Shannon if you're having questions about how to declare square footage. Driving directions, as simple as making sure that the client or that agent, the buyer's agent, is correctly going through the neighborhood. So they're seeing the best of the best, not going through and driving past the homeless encampment. I mean, that has happened to me. And it's sometimes the driving directions make all the difference in the world. And having that in the broker remarks or in the driving directions would be very helpful. Make sure the verbiage is clear. Make sure you're not just feature dumping, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 3-car garage. This one right here, BOM. I don't even know what BOM. I mean, you could say bomb. I mean, don't think that's very clear, the verbiage on the market remarks on the sample that Shannon's has here, BOM. Now, as an agent, I kind of can make inference that I think what they're trying to say is back on market, but I don't know if I want to say that to my seller that this is a bomb, BOM. Maybe it's some new slang I'm not familiar with. The charmer has been completely refreshed, refurbished, brand new roof, home shines with pride of ownership. So far, the agent's doing a pretty good job, but then they feature dump at the very end. Has 3 bedrooms, 1 3/4 bath, large utility room, full 2-car garage. It would be better if you talk about the lifestyle in the market remarks and you don't feature dump. You really talk about what does that property mean to that seller? How is that properly done? And it does take a bit of knowledge base. Maybe you want to do Chat GPT. I mean, there is some usage of Chat GPT, and ask them not to feature dump, but give you a marketing remarks that talks about the area of, and this one, Larchmont, the community of Larchmont, and a Rambler, and give Chat GPT something to go off and have the computer help you with some verbiage. But certainly you want to tell the story. You don't want to just feature dump on your marketing remarks. Let's go to the next slide. So those are just some tidy items that I would just double check, make sure everything's filled in correctly. That might be your listing's not selling. Go ahead, Shannon.
And I think for feature dumping, I think it's one thing that's just quick I'll mention is that if there's something in the listing that is a field, there's no reason to put it in the marketing remarks. It's called marketing remarks for a reason. That's where you kind of get to have a little fun with it. If you're putting in the square footage or the number of bedrooms or number of baths, you're wasting words in a way where that's something that is in the search bar. So if I'm putting 3-bedroom, 2-bath, that's something that clients are already searching for. They already found your property because of those criteria. Maybe focus on what it's nearby. I know we had a listing that was in Ballard, and it's it's near the Ballard Locks. It's walking distance to this. I mean, you're talking about the amenities and why people want to live there, especially when you're targeting people on those marketing remarks, people who are living out of state or out of the area. You want to sell them on the area, sell them on why they would want to live there.
Great point, Jan. I think the other thing to consider when you're drafting market remarks or kind of positioning your listing in amongst all of the others that might be jumping on the market here in the next 30 to 60 days, because we are a spring market. You will naturally see that, at least in the Washington and North Idaho area, you're going to see several listings come on the market because spring tends to be in our area a very desirable time to list. Kids get out of school around June, so there is a lot of movement that typically occurs in our area. Plus the weather is nice. So people sometimes think that we can't sell houses in the winter. We sell houses all year round, but for whatever reason, sellers have in their mind that summer and sunshine and the flowers in the front yard will ultimately get them higher price. And I can prove time and time again, it doesn't really matter on that. So you do want to identify who is that buyer. If you're trying to draft, like to Shannon's point, who is that end user? Maybe you started the process and listed the property with an end user in mind, and that changed. It happened recently, and I'll kind of share that story here in a minute. Patty Anderson and I had a listing out in Tukwila, and our end user changed probably 3 or 4 different times before we actually got it sold. So it was a listing we had on the market for several months. Back in August, when the market did its dipsy doodle, we had to change who is our end buyer. Who we had several offers. We had to make changes to the listing. So definitely want to have that conversation with the seller and also with yourself. And if you have a partner, make sure you understand who that end user, who that buyer really is, and then market to that buyer. Shannon's got some other tips. We're going to go through these fairly swift. Reverse marketing on the MLS. One of our brokers who'd been at a company, I won't name any names, for many years, I went and stopped at her open house, and this was a few years ago, and she didn't know, and she'd been licensed for over 10 years, so I hope this is not you. She didn't know that she had access to reverse market on the MLS. She actually thought that that would be a violation or a compliance issue, and when in fact, we highly encourage all of our listing agents to go in and reverse market to the agents who have buyers looking at their home. This happens to be a screenshot of a listing that Shannon and I have in Auburn that just went on the market on, I think, Friday. So we already have 4 people that have loves on it. I would pick up the phone and have those conversations with those agents, and you can certainly email them. They don't make it super easy to do that from the Northwest MLS, but it's what every time I do it, I am very grateful that I have done it. And my sellers love to see that you've reverse marketed their property. You've made those contacts, you've made those emails, you've asked for feedback. Definitely use reverse. And it's not hard. You go to the listing, you got to go to my listings on the MLS and then go ahead and see those stats. Candice, did you have something? Can you go back a half a step? Candice, I think you even use it to look at the count. Can you explain to everybody what the count is?
Yeah, excuse me. There's a hit counter when you pull up your listing in the MLS, and it gives a little more specific information on, this is more or less for when you're trying to report to your seller what the activity is. So it actually shows how many times it has been seen by agents, how many agents have seen it, how many agents have sent it to their clients, how many agents have rejected it to their clients, just to give a nice overview. So when you go to your listing and you're looking under my listings, so my matrix, my listings, and it's the little caret that you can change, and it's my hit counters.
Okay. Awesome. So you're going to check that out too. There's a lot of resources that sometimes you just don't know you have to click on. Thank you, Candice, for sharing that little tip. Days on market. So I get a lot of questions and a lot of agents. Again, we're at 2023 where all the websites are pulling all of the data. And that seems to be like the hot topic, right? It's like, oh my gosh, your listing's been on the market for 68 days. And that does not really tell the story. There's a lot of reasons why the days on market might be 68 days. You could basically have a deal under contract. It goes mutual. The clock stops ticking at that point. But then the buyer flakes, and then we have to go back to market and find a new buyer, right? And so then we start to the remarketing of that. So anytime you're representing a seller, the days on market is important, but also we need to be able to tell the story. So, if your counter is 60 days, 90 days, you want to see what your typical range would be. I'll go back to the Tukwila property that Patty Anderson and I listed. That was on the market since August. Well, if you looked at the property history, you could see that it went off, went on, we lowered the price, we did a lot to it. In fact, we took it off, we had to do, some garbage removal. We had, the city had torn up the street. We had a homeless encampment that decided to jump in across the street. I mean, you name it, that there was issues that we encountered. So the days on market was not because we didn't price it right or because we didn't market to the end user. It was things that were outside of the seller's control or outside of the market control. So if you can show or you can explain that days on market, either through your marketing remarks or agent remarks, that oftentimes helps a buyer or an end user going, huh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because they're really, really heavy on some of these other websites of kind of making the listing look stale. And I've been able to overcome that by just providing more explanation in the agent remarks, or doing something that we're going to talk about here in a minute, doing a temporary off market, or we do a cancel relist strategy with price. So we're going to talk about that next. So some of you at Northwest MLS that are Northwest MLS members, we have MLSs all across the state of Washington, but Northwest MLS has this rule, and the rule is that in order to do a cancel and relist, the property has to do a price reduction of 5% or more. If you can do that type of price reduction, then NWMLS sees that as a different market segment, and they will allow you to do a cancel and relist. If you just cancel just because the seller says, I changed my mind, I want to cancel, I want a new MLS number, and I want my days on market counter, you're not understanding the rules, and you can risk having a fine. I think the smallest fine I've seen is like $250. Most of our agents are trained on this when they go through MLS training. So just be careful that you're following the rules appropriately. But if you're going to be doing a price reduction like we did with the Guerilla listing, 5% reduction in price, we could do a cancel and then we could relist it, but we needed a Form 19. We needed the broker to sign it, and then we had to do a back to active, and the Northwest MLS could do that for us, but they have to have the proper form. So if it's a price reduction of 5% or greater, you can cancel and relist with a new MLS number. However, your days on market stays the same. I'm going to say that one more time because I've repeated myself probably a 12 times, Candice, over the weekend. Your property in Northwest MLS territory has to be off the market for 60 days. That means not temporary off the market, but canceled or off the market, expired, canceled. It doesn't matter if you were listed with John L. Scott, Keller Williams, or any of the other companies. That market, that tax ID number, that listing has to be off the market for 60 days before the counter would go back to zero. Otherwise, the counter continues counting. The only exception would be your cancel. Actually, there's no exception. That's the way they play at Northwest MLS. But you can get a new MLS number by doing this 5% less strategy, which has been known to help me and to help a lot of you who are struggling trying to attract a different market segment. And that's the reason they have this cancel and relist policy. So temporary up the market, let me go to the next. So hopefully that makes sense for many of you. If you have questions, certainly reach out, ask us before you go ahead and do the paperwork, because we don't want you to make a mistake and get fined. But temporary off the market is a strategy that I've used in multiple MLSs. This works at MLS, Northwest MLS. It's worked in Idaho. It's worked in Utah. And what this is basically taking the product off the shelf, reworking it, and then putting it back on the market. And then all of a sudden you draw more activity. So this has worked in order to regroup. So say, for example, you've got a lot of feedback and your seller's like very frustrated. They're like, gosh, we thought we'd get a lot of offers. Maybe if we stage it, maybe you were right, Rochelle, we should have staged the property. Okay, fine. Let's go ahead and stage it. Take it off the market, stage the property, put it back on the market. Now all of a sudden I've got multiple offers. It's just the way it goes. It wasn't in competition, or maybe the competition was staging and ours for some reason was not. It had that cold feeling. I had one listing I talked to the listing agent about this weekend where the listing smelled, needed to be freshened up. It's been unlived in for several months. And so we needed to have that taken off the market just to refresh it, clean out the smell. Literally, the smell had to be dealt with. So we did a temporary off market. When you do temporary off market with Northwest MLS, Shannon brought it to my attention the last 30 days. I think a lot of people are using this as a strategy now. They're requesting, and I think they're making this mandatory. We found that they're kicking it back. The temporary up the market, it has to be at least 7 days at Northwest MLS and no more than 45 days and they're requiring the back to active. That box on the left side must be checked so that we can do a back to active. Now, I'm not sure how Northwest MLS is handling it, if we want to go back to active earlier than that time, but they are requesting us to check both the temporary off the market and the back to active and have the seller initial and then submit. I unfortunately cannot handle temporary off market. That's only handled by Northwest MLS, but the cancellations I can do. So if you do want to cancel and relist, regroup with that 5% reduction in price, I can assist you with that. Or if you want to fire the seller, you want to step away from the project, that is your choice. I will honor that, but we want to make sure we have the proper forms. So cancellations I can do, but unfortunately I cannot help you with the temporary off market. That is something you'll have to submit to the Form 19, send that to the Northwest MLS, and they will take it off the market temporarily for you while you do whatever you need to do. No questions asked. You just have to be within that time frame, and then you do have to have the back to active.
Yeah, and I think I'll pipe in a little bit here. Rochelle used the take it off the shelf analogy, which I think is really helpful for people when they don't understand what temporarily off the market means. It's basically the ability to take it off the shelf and literally rebrand that property, right? You're remarketing it, maybe changing how it looks, change the photo order, change the things. Yeah. Maybe your seller did the repairs that came up on why you lost your buyer before. I've done that too, where it was a property in Tacoma, the sewer line came up on an inspection, and that's how we lost the buyer. Seller took it off the market temporarily, got a new sewer line, we rebranded it with new pricing, new photos, the whole thing.
I think we attached the supplementary video scope showing the clear scope too. So yeah. I mean, that's telling the story, right? We understand why the days on market is 60 days or 90 days in that case, because of the work that had to be done.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, contact information, co-op, agent, or partner. I have this, and it's a very blank screen because I want you to think about that. If you've taken a listing, and I know the one that Patty Anderson and I worked on together, I can tell you right now, and I think Patty, you could pipe in if you wanted. That was not for the faint-hearted. That was definitely a team approach to get that listing closed. There was times when I was out of town, times when she was out of town. So it really begs the question, are you giving that seller the type of service that they're desiring? Is it going to take a co? I mean, maybe I flipped it back with Patty. I put Patty's name on it for one time. It's funny because she cultivated more interest when we did it. And then I took her off. And so we cultivated more interest while she was out of town. So you can actually, if you have a partner, a business partner, a project manager, or somebody that you can go to, there's nothing wrong with having a co-op agent that will maybe have a different change, or basically it's two agents for the price of one concept that sellers, I think, ultimately desire. Sometimes if the listing is not selling, you may want to consider getting yourself a partner, paying a percentage. Maybe you share in that percentage, or that it'd be better to have something than nothing, than let the listing expire and not have another approach. You want to think about that. Maybe I do need a partner going into this. It has a bit more, maybe I've never experienced a short sale before. Maybe I've never experienced doing a land sale before. Maybe it would be helpful if I had a commercial broker, because I've never done a commercial listing before. It might be better to think about that from the standpoint of the bigger picture. Maybe you're working with a seller where the husband and the wife have different personality types, and that personality type might be better suited with that business partner, where you might you're more of a cautious or a reserved type, and you need somebody to be very blunt and just tell them what it is. If you're kind of finding yourself in those camps, that's a perfect opportunity to involve another Best Choice Realty broker. We have many all over the state of Washington. And now we're growing in Idaho too, where it was interesting. We had a situation just in the last couple of months. One of our Idaho brokers, she was she wasn't new to the business, but she recognized that having a commercial broker might be helpful. And I think they're working on an actual buyer that's come to the equation. This particular commercial broker has access and already had established himself in the different websites and different sources of business that may have helped her in obtaining a buyer. So again, look at the whole equation. Don't just get so centered on yourself. I think about the whole project as a whole. There's nothing wrong with looking at your photography and staging and video. Some of you, and in my case, we paid for a photography. The top picture there on the left was the first photographer. And then it's the same house, same property, but you can see the difference in the second one. So Patty and I, this is Patty and I, our listing that we had in Tukwila. So we attracted some buyers, but not the end use buyer. We started a different price point, but anytime we made a different change in our price, we also updated our photography. And at some point when we did a massive price drop, we went ahead and updated our photography. You're like, gosh, that seems backwards. Why would you pay more if you're also doing a price reduction? Again, the whole process of taking something off the shelf, looking at it from a different perspective, you can see the difference in just both photos. The left side was one photographer, the right side was another photographer. The second, if you look at the bottom photos, we actually did have somebody come and just prime the paint. Thank you, Patty, for having your crew do that. But it's a different approach. And so whenever you have a change to the inside, the exterior, the interior, or you have like a change in seasons, we shouldn't be showcasing Christmas photos or holiday photos in December right now in May. You might want to think about, yep, you got to bite the bullet and pay for a photographer to reshoot the photos. We had to do that in this case, and it works really well. Same thing with video and staging. You know, you might have to rethink how you stage it or how you video it. Take it off the market temporarily so you can get the shots redone and then put it back, and you'll notice the surge of activity that surrounds that. But more importantly, your seller is looking at you to the professional. You know, definitely your reputation's on the line when it comes to photography and staging and video. It all matters. Let's go to the next slide. Showing time to use or not to use. Shannon, I'm going to lean on you here on showing time. Do you want to share an example of showing time?
Yeah, so I would say this really comes down to the seller that you're working with and obviously the circumstances for the house. So Showing Time is a Zillow owned product. So there's a lot of people that feel a certain way about it. But it is a tool that we can use in the Northwest MLS to basically bridge the gap between buyer's agents and sellers, and especially with sellers that are living in the home when it is on the market. So it is very nice for ones that, you know, they need a certain lead time or need things like this, but you're dealing with a product that is a piece of technology, right? So not all clients are going to be raw showing time. Some of them just want a phone call. Some of them want a text message, or some of them don't want any of that, right? If it's vacant, just go and show, right? My feelings about showing time is that some agents, you have to be very clear in your showing instructions that you're requesting things done through there. If you have a vacant house specifically, making sure you have those in your remarks. Some people, they don't follow the instructions with vacant homes. So go in with your eyes wide open. They are still required to leave a business card, but just make sure that you're very clear with that. It is a violation to not follow showing instructions. It is, if my word of advice, I suppose, here is that just make sure that you've gotten your text or your push notification set up for it as an agent when you have Showing Time and you're using that. This is a way for you to get feedback from people. I personally, the way that I use it is I see that, oh, someone has a confirmation. I see it all on my phone on when people are scheduled to use. It gives you a very easy way to copy and paste phone numbers and get maybe a text message or a phone call and say, hey, what did you and your clients think about this showing? I saw that you just showed it an hour ago. Rather than relying on Showing Time for their feedback, that's a tool that some people use. It does have the ability to send feedback, which I think some people, Candice could speak to this a little bit too. There's mixed feelings about those types of feedback, automated things. For me, it would depend on the circumstance. If it's a vacant house, I may not use Showing Time. Maybe I do, and that's my way of keeping track of the activity. If there's a tenant, I certainly want to make sure that that tenant or that seller is very aware of who is going in and out of their house for security purposes at the very least. So, varies on the circumstance, I suppose.
Yeah. And so that's that kind of thought. My thought is I've taken Showing Time off. If I was, in a situation where I had one listing I was managing, and it was just, I was going to put all of my efforts around getting that listing promoted and sold. Honestly, Shan, I probably would take the Showing Time thing down, and I would want to have conversations with anybody and everybody that's going through that property. Yeah. And I want to put a barrier between entry so I can basically talk to I know an agent who doesn't have showing time on their app and is not accustomed. I want to get as many people through that property as possible. So I may just require a text or a phone call to show, so that I can have that conversation. I think that's the way Patty and I worked it. We actually at one time had showing time, and then we got so many people that were trying to figure out how to get in and the access. We ended up just tag teaming it and just putting our number as the phone to show. And that's how we ended up getting the buyer. It happened to be a buyer coming from Best Choice too. So it was like, it was just the way it worked, because we were actually answering our phones and really dealing with the inquiries. And so if you have the time to spend, I don't know, that's probably the best time that you can spend, is following up with the inquiries of anybody who's interested in showing or taking a client through your property. So by shifting that focus over to showing time, Shannon, yes, I know it's easy, and some listings would do that, but I would say you might want to rethink it. If you're not getting the feedback the way you need to, or you're just getting people just going through the motions, you change it up, take the showing time off, and maybe you actually personally contact anybody that wants to show the property. So you essentially are showing, you're the marketer, you're the one that's gathering the feedback. The sellers are going to trust you. So you might want to rethink whether you use showing time or not. I want you to think about to use or not to use, and think about what Shannon said. And you're from the younger generation, Shannon. I mean, I get the ease of use, but you also made some very valid points.
Yeah, it's not for everybody, and it's not for every seller specifically as well. So
perfect.
Yeah.
While we're talking about showing time and things like that, also be sure, I think across the board, if somebody was to say, Rochelle, are you allowing other websites to prohibit blogging, those types of things on MLS? The answer would be yes. The automated valuation, I'm turning that sucker off. And the prohibit the blogging, yes, I'm turning that off. Be sure you're going and doing that on your listings, because the default sometimes is not in your benefit. And that can also offset some of the negative feedback surrounding your listing, or the pricing is not correct. The AVM is not correct. I think we did that on our listing that we have in Auburn, Shannon. I mean, it's totally off. The Redfin was off, Zillow was off, and eAppraisal was off by a lot. They were calculating single family properties instead of townhomes. So again, the calculators of the automated valuation, if it works for you, or if it helps you, your price below Zillow, for example, go for it. But I'm finding that it's actually off more than it's on. Correct.
Yeah, this is the type of market where you, as a seller, I wouldn't want to have that on there. The value of the house is what's listed. So don't rely on the evaluator to basically, you're basically asking someone to lowball you in a way, in many cases. So turn it off when you can. It is literally a click of a button to do so. We've played with this time and time again, and it's just much, much better when working with that seller if it postures you up as the person who helped price the home, if you're not relying on those online evaluators. So
okay, scroll or go to the next slide. I think we're almost done. Involve your lender. You may want to get, if Sam's got a product, let's go ahead and get a kind of a pricing sheet. We did that with our Guerilla listing. There was a rehab loan that would have worked. So we got a flyer that Deanne and Sam put together. We uploaded that as a supplement. Involving a lender, or if there's a creative program that would help that condominium sell, my goodness, put that name and that phone number in the agent remarks so that lender can help you essentially sell that product. There are some challenges out there, and it requires specific financing or creativity that not all lenders or banks have. So, you may have to involve the lender. You also want to consider the HOA on condominiums. The reserves become very important. The supplemental information becomes very important. Definitely want to gather that before you take the listing, or at least, when you start to get a lot of activity, upload that information or make that available for interested buyers agents, because that is hugely important when you're looking at selling a condominium or a community where there's HOAs involved.
Yeah, and this comes up a lot with seller procured inspections, resale certificates. It is a tactic to withhold information to kind of actually vet the serious parties. So it's up to you. Do you want to have that available for everybody to make it easy for them to offer, make a determination, or do you kind of want to vet and screen a little bit for that seller?
You also want to look at the competition. What's the competition doing? Maybe that's why they got their deal done. It was very easy to see that on another condo that we had a challenge selling this last month, but it wasn't until I opened everything up for the seller and sat down and we did a remarket, rebooted it, everything, got the price where it needed to be, but I had to open up and show what her competition was doing and why we had to make those adjustments. And once we did that, she was willing to adjust the price, but not only that, she realized that we were looking at the full plan. Always have a communication plan. Candice and I are very, very big about that. If you're waiting for the seller to come to you, you've already lost. You got to make sure you're on a weekly communication follow-up. At a minimum, it's got to be monthly, but we're finding when listings are sitting longer, it's got to be weekly. Find a day, you call the sellers, you give them, even if there's no update, they want to hear from you. If you don't, you're going to run the risk that you're going to be challenged at a price reduction or they're going to threaten to cancel. That's just their expectation going into this.
Yep. No update is still an update, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Go to the next slide. Home sale contingencies. I wanted to show you this. If you have they listed their home because they are going to be buying another home and they bought contingent, we are seeing more of those types of scenarios. If you're struggling with, say you like locked in and you found the house they want to buy, and again, it would be not excluding new construction because new construction they won't drop their price, but let's say they're buying a resale and that seller has also, it's kind of the domino effect where there's all these buyers and sellers moving during the spring and the summer market. You might want to go back if you're having a struggle and you're like on day 43, and you're about ready to go off the market, you're not going to meet that home sale contingency. You may want to go back to the seller that you've negotiated and say, you know what, we're going to need to drop our price by this weekend to get a buyer. We know you want to sell to us. Please help us. And you can almost negotiate. This is a strategy we used a lot in 2009, 10, 11, 12. Still works today. We just practiced that with another listing we did here in Seattle. And we got the seller to reduce the price enough, kind of to share in the pain. That's kind of the concept, right? Share in the pain. So if you've got a situation like that where the seller may reduce a little bit, then I could maybe do this kind of thing on the screen here where it's like $475. We do the price change, but then if it doesn't sell by May 11th, we do $470. And then I get the seller of the home they're buying to chip in $5,000 so we can do a $465 adjustment. You could essentially map out this pricing strategy and meet those demands of, like, say, the home sale contingency. It's a much more of an intermediate or advanced concept. Certainly, if you've never done something like this, talk to me, talk to Candice. We've done these types of strategies. But again, we may want to, instead of doing this type of amendment, we may want to cancel and relist. And because $475 to $450 is more than a 5% adjustment, right, Shannon, when we did the math?
Yeah.
So we may want to consider doing something like that and writing that into our amendment, our Form 18, rather than doing what we've got here on the screen. So there's a lot of creativity that goes into some of these things. But all in all, when you get a seller who's trying to make decisions about price, don't just go and say, we need to drop the price by 10,000. We need to drop. Show them the numbers, walk them through the net sheet, show them what that's going to do. We don't get paid, if we do the price reduction, we actually get paid less. So it doesn't help us, but showing them the numbers helps sellers oftentimes make that decision. That it's something that has to be done based on X, Y, or Z, and explaining not just we need to drop the price by X. Here's what your net would be at the 485. Here's what your net would be at the 475. Even if you seem to think like, oh, it's not that big of a difference. It is to them. It is to that seller. So we're here to help. I know Candice and I welcome those opportunities. We'd rather have you take listings, but we want you to take some sellable listings. Hopefully some of the tips that we talked about tonight will give you some insight, but we're willing to roll up our sleeves and kind of look at the whole thing top to bottom. And we definitely have contacts with stagers, photographers, and the like. Did I cover what we needed to cover, Shannon, Candice?
Yeah, we just had a real quick question from Craig, and he's saying, as a listing agent, is it good practice to allow multiple selling agents to view the property at the same time? So concurrent showings. What do you think about that right now in this market we're in, Rochelle?
I'm perfectly fine with concurrent showings, but again, I'm not the only one out there. It depends on the situation. Candice, what do you think about concurrent showings?
Concurrent is fine, but when they're, it's all open, free for all, that can be a little difficult for sure.
I think we might want to tighten it down, right? So a good hybrid. I'm fine. I like free for all, Candice. So Candice is more structured, and she'd probably turn down maybe the amount of time, because you can do that if you're blocking out time on showing time. So instead of spending an entire hour and allowing concurrent, she may just go ahead and button that down so it's 15-minute slots, right?
Well, 15 minutes is a little tight, I would think, for most showings. 30 minutes tends to be a good buyer. So I would probably go from an hour to 30 minutes typically if you're wanting to tighten it up a little bit. But some houses, if it's vacant, there's not really any reason why you can't do that.
Correct.
Yep. Plus, you make a good point. It's very uncomfortable for buyer's agents. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, and my goal is only to show 3 homes. So this is one of 3 homes that we're going to tour. I would like it to be private.
Yeah.